Good afternoon and welcome to this Green Homes Festival webinar. You're joining us on day one of the Green Homes Festival. This webinar is around using sustainable materials. My name's Emma Church. I'm an impact manager with the sustainability team at Built Environment Smarter Transformation, and I'll be your host today. We are hearing from great speakers today. We have David Steen from the UK Green Building Council, Sam Patterson, my colleague from Built Environment Smarter Transformation, and Peter Smith from James Architects. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the presentations today. This session will be recorded and available to view on Best's YouTube channel, but also on the Green Homes Festival website. And so we'll be able to circulate and share that link with you if you'd like to look back on the presentation or share with any of your colleagues. We do have a couple of opportunities for audience participation today. If you'd like to ask a question or leave a comment, you can do so in the control panel. Type in your question and press send, and we'll pick them up at the session for questions and answers at the end. There's also a couple of poll questions today. These will appear automatically on your screen, and you'll have about 30 seconds to answer those. Thank you. And finally, your feedback is really valuable to us in terms of how we run the webinars and the content, so we will take any comments on board on that, and there will be an opportunity for you to provide feedback at the very end of the webinar. So just before we get started, we'll have our first poll. So where are you on your net zero journey? Is business as usual? Are you trying to improve your climate literacy? Do you have a route map for your company and organisation in its transition to net zero? Are you calculating your scope 1 and 2 emissions or calculating your scope 3 emissions? It'd be great to hear about where you are in your journey. Just a few more seconds. Excellent, thank you so much. So great to see that there are plenty of our audience already partway or starting on that journey towards net zero. And for those of you who are sitting at business as usual, hopefully there'll be some insights or inspiration today from our speakers to help you get onto that next journey and start your own journey to net zero. So first up today, we are hearing from David Steen from the UK Green Building Council on embodied carbon and why that's important. David is the UK Green Building Council Scotland Policy Advisor and manages the political advocacy into all levels of Scottish governance and engaging with the UK Green Building Council's industry members in shaping the future policy landscape for Scotland's built environment. I'll hand you over to David now.
Hi everyone, good to be with you today. So as Emma said, I'm David Steen. I'm the UK Green Building Council's Scotland Policy Advisor. So I'm going to be speaking briefly this afternoon on embodied carbon. So what is it, why it's important, and how it relates to the wider conversation around the sustainability of materials and the ways of working that we in the sector are thinking about every day. So the UK Green Building Council, for those who don't know, we are a member organisation and advocacy group. We represent around 700 of the most forward-thinking businesses and stakeholders in the built environment sector. And at COP26 last year, we launched a dedicated presence in Scotland. That was really in recognition of the fact that Scotland, through both its historically innovative industry and also the level of political ambition that's been displayed in Scotland, it really represents some unique opportunities to move quickly in answering the pressing questions around sustainability in the built environment that we're all facing at the moment. So, what is embodied carbon? As I'm sure many of you on the call will be aware, this is a slightly contentious issue. There are a lot of definitions for what embodied carbon actually represents. For me, I think the broadest and most comprehensive definition is really the most useful. And the way I like to think about it is that it's all of the carbon emissions associated with a building or a project that don't arise from its operation. So that's the sort of cradle to grave definition, and it includes everything from extracting the raw materials that are going to be used in the project, processing them and producing them into products that are going to be used, transforming them and transporting them to the site, through the construction process itself, and then thinking about a whole life perspective, that runs right through the maintenance of the building throughout its life, and even to its eventual demolition and disposal, and what happens to all those materials after the useful life of the building. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware that until now, the conversation around decarbonisation of the built environment has really focused on those operational emissions that I mentioned. So those associated with heating, cooling, and powering our buildings. But as we begin to address those emissions and the operational emissions of our buildings begins to drop, embodied carbon as a proportion of the total will only increase. And if we don't start working to address it now, it's quickly going to become an issue as we work towards a net zero built environment. So at the moment, just to give you an idea of the scale of the challenge, at the moment, around 20% of all the carbon emissions associated with the built environment are from these embodied parts of the whole life of a building. But our trajectories indicate that on the current pathway, embodied emissions will represent over half of all the emissions from the built environment by 2035. And that really reflects, the ongoing progress towards decarbonising the operation of our buildings and the electricity grid in Scotland. So just to talk a little bit more about the scale of the challenge as well. So since 1990, the industry has really only achieved one period of meaningful reduction in embodied emissions, and that was slightly accidental. It was the period following the financial crisis of 2008. And our own analysis at UKGBC indicates that across the UK, embodied carbon emissions must be slashed by more than half in the next decade if we're to remain on track for net zero by 2050. And of course, Scotland needs to move in a slightly accelerated timeline to reach our own goal of 2045 net zero. But despite this, measurement and mitigation across construction projects remains voluntary. So we are really advocating that government take action first to mandate consistent measurement of embodied carbon, followed by limits introduced at the earliest opportunity, as well as obviously support for industrial decarbonisation of supply chains and reduce demand for new construction and materials through increased design efficiency, reuse and circularity, as I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot of throughout this week at the Green Homes Festival. So we at UKGBC advocate that policy and industry move away from an operational focus for carbon emissions towards a whole life approach, taking into account the entire impact of a building project whenever considering how to reduce its climate impact. And at the end of last year, we published our whole life carbon roadmap, which really aims to outline a common vision for the industry and agreed upon actions for achieving net zero carbon in the construction, operation and demolition of buildings and infrastructure across the UK. And the graphic that you can see on screen right now, that really illustrates the pressing need to start addressing embodied as a key segment of our emissions. So you can see from the sort of beige and brown segments at the top of this graph that embodied emissions haven't fallen significantly in the last 2 decades, and the need for really significant reductions between now and 2035 if we're to remain on track for our net zero goals. So the headline recommendation for our roadmap is that policy must be introduced as soon as possible to mandate the measurement and reporting of embodied carbon across construction projects. So this would obviously start with those most able to do so and then filter down through the rest of the sector. And it must be followed by the introduction of limits on embodied carbon for new buildings that can then ratchet down as we get closer to 2045. And we think this it'll also be necessary to make changes to the planning system and even the VAT regime to incentivise retrofit and adaptive reuse of existing buildings over demolition and new build as a key component of addressing embodied carbon. And then for industry, those wanting to get out ahead of upcoming changes and those thinking ahead in how they decarbonise their own business should really be starting to think about prioritising embodied carbon with the same strategic importance as operational emissions. And that means taking into account embodied emissions whenever you're thinking about materials, processes, procurement, and even what projects to work on. So apologies for the wall of text on these slides. This is really just to represent a bit of an idea of the breadth of the changes that we are recommending and we think are required to fully address the question of embodied carbon. So these come from our whole life carbon roadmap, and you can see, changes to the planning system to prioritize adaptive reuse, a series of measures to introduce limits to embodied carbon for different building types, phased in over time, and then tools and products and databases to help the industry to start to understand how to track and measure and report the embodied carbon that is associated with their projects, and to make the best decisions that are available right now in beginning to address those embodied carbon emissions that are associated with our projects. And there are some more as well. So starting to think about EPDs, providing financial support even to SMEs who are less able to start thinking about these changes. And a really big one for us is looking at VAT and how a reduction in VAT on refurbishment works could really incentivize the industry to start thinking about adaptive reuse as a priority over new build. So if you would like to dig any deeper into any of these recommendations or the questions that we're highlighting in the roadmap, I'm sure the team at BEST will be happy to put you in touch with me, or you can search for the UK GBC Whole Life Carbon Roadmap online to dig into the details there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. That was a really great introduction, and hopefully the audience are now a better understanding of what is embodied carbon and where they can go to find out more and start thinking about how they can make changes and improvements on that side of things. Fantastic, thank you. Next up, we have Sam Patterson from Built Environment Smarter Transformation. Sam is an Associate Impact Manager within the Sustainability Programme at BEST. And he leads on all technical aspects of sustainable programme delivery, and in particular, innovative material development and wider embodied carbon related projects. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Ella. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Has that come through?
Yep, we can see that. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks. This afternoon I'd like to talk about the journey ahead. We are at the start of 3 years into a 26-year journey towards 2045, and that's really just in recognition of when a lot of countries started declaring the climate crisis rather than the climate emergency, and all the other terms that predated that. So really, in the current definition or current scope of works, we've got 26 years to plan, to forecast, to understand, and we are at the start of that. So hopefully the presentation will bring a few new tools, a few new materials, or a few question marks that you can take further into that route map ahead for you. So first things, to quote Tom Steyer, the American philanthropist and environmentalist, innovate, accelerate, scale. When it comes to the climate crisis, winning slowly is the same as losing. To rebuild the world, we need to innovate, accelerate, and scale bold climate solutions. And when we bring in change, when we bring in a move away from business as usual, there's obviously increased risks with that. And I suppose that's where BEST as an innovation centre hopes to be able to help through our collaborative, progressive, greener, innovative, cleaner, smarter, and hopefully unexpected ways of working. Really, hopefully being a one-stop shop for companies to come and find out about that route map, find out what others are doing, share knowledge, and start to grow and move the industry as a whole. Some of our own targets there. I won't read through all of them, but I'm not one for doing the doom and gloom of the percentages. I think as an industry, we are aware of the size and scale of that we contribute to the carbon emissions. But really, it's just to kind of highlight the top right point there, is we need radical change in mindset and culture. So I'm looking at that first poll. For those of you who are looking to look at route maps for your organization, understanding where the opportunities are, what that might look like, and essentially making sure that the first steps are as low risk as possible, but in the more impactful way. Not to be shy away from too many percentage points, but as you can see, we are big contributors. But I bring this slide up not to do the doom and gloom aspect, but to understand the problems that face. But you'll be familiar with the reduce, recycle, reuse. I'm hoping that we can move to a reduce, reuse, recycle, and just that little flipping of those last two terms hopefully brings into focus the opportunities of the circular economy. Now, there's the bill consultations for the circular economy in Scotland and the route map consultations. Those are ongoing and live at the moment. If you haven't checked them out already, there's a fantastic webinar on Zero Waste Scotland website, and the consultations are open until the 22nd of August. Do have a look over that, because there is a specific section to construction in that route map. But again, that behavior and cultural change, if we are going to look to use circular items and increase circularity within construction, the way we think about design, the time we have to identify materials and opportunities for reuse will have to be reflected in the processes that we embrace and move on from. So for part of your own journey, just going through a few projects, a few things that might be able to help. If you haven't heard of it already, the low carbon learning program that we've been delivering online and through practical events in our innovation factory is really giving people a chance to become more familiar with passive house, retrofit, and fabric first, which are all key to understanding how we choose the materials and what can drive that better performance. Following on from that, understanding how the operational carbon functions, and not to steal too much light from Emma, but Heat Source is a fantastic website with content that's been generated around the best practice for heat pumps, solar, thermal, wastewater, and district heat networks. These are all things that have been tested and tried over recent decades, but really mainstreaming these at scale is the next challenge, and figuring out how that can be brought into your next project. So I think Peter will be touching more on the transforming on the timber aspect of building, but if you're not familiar, check out our Transforming Timber project, which has been looking at mass timber solutions through the use of the vacuum press in our innovation factory, and trying to demystify and to disprove some of the assumptions around mass timber and the use of Scottish timber in that process. The website has a lot of the reports that have been generated through that process and now being scaled up on commercial projects through ecosystems technologies. Another one that we have demonstrated in our factory is the K-brick by Kenetech, one of the world's first 90% recycled bricks. And really the chance here is to incorporate some of that circularity of construction waste. Soils, aggregates, some of those heavier materials really are what drive the savings that we can make in the tonnage going to landfill or other areas. So trying to provide a high value use for those and create new building materials in Scotland is what Kenetech are now scaling up. And they've got their first facility over in Hamilton Waste Recycling in Edinburgh. So seeing what can be done with these new innovative products, but also how as an organization we can help them grow in size and increase their capacity to produce new materials within Scotland. So if you haven't heard of them, check it out. We've got some fantastic materials online. But also looking to hopefully later in the year, Indie Nature, who are bringing out Indie Therm and Indie Board. They have received a bunch of funding from Zero Waste Scotland and the Scottish National Investment Bank to set up what will be Scotland's first natural insulation manufacturer in Scotland. And that's using hemp, which has a 14 to 16 week growing cycle, so it can start to sequester carbon at a much faster speed. And because insulation is such a lightweight volumetric product, hopefully this is one of the ways that we can drive some more value out of sequestering those materials into the building process. But also maybe a little bit further back in their innovation journey, but Sisal Tech are working on Sisal Wool 100, which is combining a recycled wool and Sisal fiber, which is naturally hygroscopic. They're currently making the material with some of their European partners with the aim to be able to set up their own Scottish manufacturing facility. So if you do get a chance, check it out, and if you can help them on their journey and increase the consumption of that product, again, that's sequestered carbon materials into that product as well. But with all the talk of what new materials are out there, I thought it'd be worth just flagging up a couple of resources that can help analyze and share and compare what's out there in the market. And the first one would be Material Considerations, which is an online resource led by Architecture and Design Scotland. But they have a large variety of sustainable building materials that can go into what they're used for, what some of the key metrics are, who the suppliers are, what the contact details are. And you can add them to the flavors, to the swatch book. And this is, they also have a physical version that's currently within City of Glasgow College. So a chance to go and feel and understand the materials as well. But another one which is maybe newer to the market, First Planet. I only had a first call with them last week, but it looks to be a really interesting platform, only launched earlier this year and still in its infancy. But actually, it has a really interesting set of algorithms and user interface that makes it really easy to compare, contrast different materials, ranging from insulation to cements to bricks to all sorts of building finishes. Now, the more the companies list, and it's free to list materials, and the more the people use to compare, it's free to use as a specifier, the more that we can build that type of platform in, because when we have EPDs and LCAs, it's actually trying to compare those, which becomes the difficult part. So understanding that there are platforms that are being generated to help and demystify that through the 18 various attributes that you can see at the bottom of the screen there will hopefully help people on that journey. And I think this is a really user-friendly way of doing that. But hopefully that's a whistle-stop tour. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to any questions you have at the end.
Hi everyone, thanks Sam, that was really great, fantastic overview of the projects that we support at BEST, but also sustainable materials and how people can get involved. Next up, we are going to hear from Peter Smith from James Architects, an architect and passive house designer, a qualified carpenter and joiner, passionate about sustainable and sensitive design using natural materials and homegrown timber. Lots of experience delivering bespoke house designs and small-scale community developments. Based in Glasgow, he runs the Scottish office for Roderick James Architects. So yeah, pass you over to Peter to give you some insights of his putting these principles into practice.
Thank you, Emma. I'm just trying to load up my screen. Can you see the wee cop house with the red roof?
Yep, we can. Thank you, Peter.
Great. So thanks for inviting me along, and thanks to David and Sam for their talks. You've kind of given a good background and said a few of the things that I was going to talk about in my presentation, so I'll kind of skip over them and just focus mainly on this house that you can see here. It's an example, a showcase house, something that we built for COP26 in Glasgow last year to show the rest of the world what we can do with the timber that we can grow in this country. So it's an example of using natural materials, focusing mainly on wood. Of course, there are other great things out there, like the hemp insulation that Indie Nature are doing. and lots of other examples, but this house focuses mainly on homegrown Scottish timber and timber-based products to help reduce embodied carbon. Just a little bit of background. Basically, it started with an idea to build this house for a COP. I had no idea what it would end up looking like, but I went around the country and asked lots of different people to get involved and to contribute, and this is what we ended up with. So here are some of the companies that came on board with us, very kindly donating materials, expertise, and some money to help build this house. The main ones being really BSW, who provided all of the raw timber for the houses, and they came on board with Robertson Construction and Urban Union to provide the labour to build it. But you can see there's lots of other people involved who all very kindly gave us their materials and expertise. So we came together and really quite quickly realized it wasn't just about building a zero carbon house. It was also about the way that all of us came together to collaborate on this project and to show the world that sustainable buildings can also be beautiful, and there are many other positive sides, not just the carbon. It goes beyond zero carbon to showcase, that beautiful, healthy homes don't need to be for the select few. It should be possible to do this for everybody. So a little bit of background here. David and Sam kind of spoke about this, but the responsibility that we have is also a massive opportunity, I think. And we as an industry, the construction industry, is responsible for so much in terms of carbon emissions, but also we are the ones who can actually make the biggest difference. So it's on the one hand a negative, on the other hand a positive. It depends how you choose to see it. Current situation, of course, we need to build a lot more houses, and we need to retrofit the existing houses that we have. And at the scale that we need to do these things, if we carry on with business as usual, and it's interesting to see the poll at the start, business as usual is not an option anymore. And we have to think as well about the buildings that we are putting into the world right now. They are going to be around in 2050, and so if we don't do them right, we don't get to kind of demolish them and start again. We have to do them right this time. We only get one chance at this. So get them right now so that we're not retrofitting them in 10 or 20 years time. So a little bit of background about my own company, Roderick James Architects. Not my company, I work for them, but we've been operating in the UK for the last 20-30 years, building mostly oak framed houses. But up in Scotland, we've been using much more of the kind of Douglas fir, Sitka spruce, and we've teamed up on several occasions with BSW Timber, and they've provided timber for us to build a variety of houses across the country as showcase homes. So it's tried and tested designs and build systems that we've established with them over many years. And this the COP house was just one example of many different buildings that that we've learnt how to specialize in terms of using homegrown timber. So the actual design for this individual house itself, the one we built for COP, actually came from a small development of 12 affordable houses in Cairngorm National Park. And I decided to take the smallest of those. It's a one-bed house with a studio mezzanine in the roof space, and so it's kind of oven ready. It's got planning permission, building warrant, all the drawings. We've got 4 other house types very similar. But what we did was took that house, which wasn't designed specifically in terms of zero carbon, and we took it apart, looked at all the constituent elements, and focused on how to reduce the embodied carbon as much as possible within each individual element. We then put it back, took the kit of parts, put them back together, having looked at the various aspects of it to see how we can reduce the embodied carbon, and then compared it to the RIBA 2030 climate challenge values and targets that are kind of commonly adopted across the industry. This is where we're heading for. And luckily for us, we beat the targets, not just beat the targets, but beat, well under the targets for 2030 already, with the timber, the technology, the know-how that we have in this country right now. So we don't have to wait until 2030 to meet the targets. We can do this now. It is entirely possible. It just needs a collective will to move away from business as usual. I think we're kind of getting there. This one shows just what those numbers in the previous slide mean in kind of real terms. So an average house of that size would emit roughly 80 tons of carbon into the atmosphere in order to turn the raw materials into a building. Our house would emit less than half of that. We've had been able to look through this life cycle assessment that we did at where the bulk of the embodied carbon comes from. Obviously, most of it, as you can see, comes from the raw materials, but interestingly, around a quarter comes from material replacement and end of life, what you do with the materials after the 50, 100, 150 year lifespan of the building. I'll come back to that in a little bit. This one I think is very interesting. So the figures before about the embodied carbon that was produced during the course of construction and end of life. When you compare that to the amount of carbon that is actually stored in the building, in the fabric of the building, you can actually look at this house as a carbon storage facility rather than something that actually emits carbon into the atmosphere. And this is basically how we did it, a series of photos starting in the top corner. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but top left-hand corner shows the floor plate and a couple of the walls. This was the first day of construction. You can see here we actually were able to use railway sleepers as the foundations for this house. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do that everywhere, but we looked at different options of using recycled concrete blocks, which of course, rather than demolishing these concrete buildings from the 1960s and turning them into rubble and sending them to landfill, we could take them apart and use the walls, the columns, the foundations, and instead of having a singular lifespan for these different elements, they could be reused as the foundations for new buildings. That kind of thing. It's just, you know, looking at the materials we have available and how best to use them. The rest of the building, as you can see, it was almost all timber, from the roof panels, the insulation, the wall lining, the external cladding, the insulation boards that went onto the outside, even the roofing. Rather than using corrugated metal, we, in this case, were able to use timber roof boards laid in a kind of hit and miss pattern. So it kind of looks like corrugated metal, but it's actually made of timber and therefore low in carbon. And a slide there to show that, you know, as well as being zero carbon, it actually looks nice, and everybody who came into that building loved it instantly. It was November, it was cold outside, but it was nice and warm within this building. Some details there on, and I'll kind of whiz through this a little bit, but I can, the presentation will be made available to share around, so you can interrogate some of these figures. Obviously, the embodied carbon of a building, most of the mass of it is within the envelope. So the ground floor, the roof, and the external walls make up most of the embodied carbon. But also, this is where we can store most of the carbon if we make that envelope out of timber and timber-based or natural products. Coming to the end of the presentation, just going back to the circular economy principles. The house was designed, obviously COP26 was a temporary thing, so we had to design the building to be deconstructed, and that is a massive part of the circular economy anyway. So we designed it in 1.2 or 2.4 meter wide panels that could then be taken apart, put on the back of a lorry, and we've ended up donating the house to the City of Glasgow College, who are going to rebuild it on their campus up at Cathedral Street, and use it as a classroom facility, or it may even house the library of sustainable materials that used to be at the lighthouse. And also used as a learning facility, just the whole process of reconstruction. A little bit of figures in terms of how long. These are based on questions I've had previously about the house, so maybe that other people were wondering, you know, how long does it take to build? Roughly, what does it cost? It was 2 weeks off-site in the factory, prefabricating the panels, and 8 weeks on site. It was a mad rush to get it done for COP26 in November. We started on site at the beginning of September. So I think in future, I would allow a little bit more time just to give everyone a bit of breathing space. But obviously, if you're building these as part of a larger development, there will be savings to be made in terms of timescales. But also in terms of approximate cost, I asked everyone who contributed to this house, what would they charge for a future house, and the total, including labour, for the construction cost came to around 140k, which is roughly £2,000 a square metre, which I know isn't cheap, but is in line with industry norms for this level of quality and low carbon materials. Deconstruction took around 4 weeks. And very quickly, some other house designs that I mentioned earlier, houses we've built with BSW using homegrown Scottish timber. Actually, this one was down south in the New Forest. Yeah, across the UK, we've got house designs that can be adapted to various locations, build systems that work for every location, even urban environments and multi-story, different options to choose from. Last couple of slides, just talking about you know, what's next. We've obviously created this house as a showcase for what can be done. We want to now look at building small developments of 10, 20 of these houses in sites all over the country. So if you know of anyone, or if you yourself are interested in building, then please do get in touch. We're ready when you are. And some slides, some photos there to let you see. There's a website that you can go to, and I am more than happy to send more information around to anyone that's interested. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was really inspiring and fantastic to see, you know, what can be achieved and how to put some of these principles that we've been talking about really into practice. And I think it's great for the audience to know that there are, you know, companies like yourselves and suppliers out there that can actually help make these types of projects a reality. And, you know, more and more, that's what we want to see, these coming into the mainstream. So that's us heard from all of our speakers today. Thank you so much. Before we move on to the question and answer session, we do have a second poll. So in your opinion, for the audience, where can change be made to have the quickest impact in advancing this zero carbon journey and the development of more sustainable materials? So development of more sustainable materials, creating energy efficient operational buildings, changing the construction process, upskilling the workforce, or introducing new policy and regulations. You have a few more seconds to answer that, and we'll see what the audience think. Okay, so a bit of a split, but definitely, you know, policy and regulation seems to be the kind of favoured option there, and I think that's fairly typical of a lot of things. Sticks tend to work a little bit more effectively than carrots, as they say. But yeah, more availability and obviously widespread ability of these materials is obviously something that the audience agrees with, and the things like the Sustainable Materials Library and these different resources and sources of information that we've talked about today hopefully will go some way to mainstreaming those products. So yeah, let's move into the Q&A. My panelists have joined me again. So first up, I believe the question for David. So a question from Mike, who's really positive about the UK GBC's embodied carbon roadmap. But the question is, what's being done to get this message on embodied carbon out to government, councils and social landlords, for example, where it's felt that there's a bit of a knowledge gap and a lack of understanding there?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for the question. I think that's a really key point, that you know, Embodied is a bit of the missing puzzle piece at the minute in terms of policymakers thinking on addressing carbon in the built environment. So we're really at the early stages of this, and at the minute it's mostly taking the form of one-to-one conversations with policymakers and officials to help them in their understanding of you know, what embodied carbon is, the scale of the problem, and helping them to think about what mechanisms may be appropriate in starting to address it. I would say that those conversations currently are much more positive in Scotland than they are down south with the Westminster government. I think there's a recognition in Scotland that with our accelerated timeline to 2045 net zero target, you know, this will have to come into policy and regulation ahead of the rest of the UK. So you know, some very senior and key elected officials are definitely thinking about this and considering what is the most appropriate way to regulate. You know, is it through the planning system? Is it through building regs? How can we start to get this on people's radar? So for us at UK GBC, I would say, you know, we feel that one of the most effective ways of influencing policy is to let policymakers hear from the industry and from stakeholders in the built environment that they are thinking about this already and ready to move. So if anybody on the call is you know, keen to get involved in that conversation, please do reach out. You know, we have interest groups around embodied carbon, and I think the more people from industry and people who are working on this, you know, we're partnering with Built Environment Smarter Transformation on Embodied as well. You know, the more people we have in that conversation that can come in and show policymakers that they're ready to start moving on embodied carbon, the quicker we'll get those productive conversations moved along to the point where we are starting to introduce requirements for measurement and enabling the rest of the industry to come in behind those who are already moving on it.
Excellent. Thanks very much, David. If anybody else wants to come in and has a comment on that in terms of what you're aware of in terms of engaging with that sector as well, if anyone else has got any input on that.
No, I think David covered it quite well there. I would agree with everything.
I was just going to say, I think, like with the poll, I mean, we can wait on new building materials to come through, but that's not going to be the solution for everything. New products will pop up over the course of this journey, but we have the materials now to start with a fabric first approach and to really consider the performance of buildings, but also the performance gap that we see. And I think the success of Passive House in the past 2 years is really because of how thin the performance gap is from what's designed and what's modeled to what we see in post-occupancy evaluation. So understanding how we tighten that gap, whether it be Passive House or Passive House equivalent, we really need to start looking at those higher building performances. And really, it's just a reminder, building regs are the bare minimum. Companies should be trying to stretch beyond that. And the more you can stretch now, the better you'll be prepared for the future, because we'll see more and more iterations and variations and development of those regulations over the next decade or so.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and just one thing I wanted to add in terms of the audience, if you got strong opinions or you want to understand a little bit more what's happening in the kind of circular economy side of things, there is an open circular economy bill and circular economy route map consultation available. So if you want to have a read at that, and that lays out Scottish Government's sort of plans on this, a kind of related topic of circularity, reuse of materials and thinking about the end of life for products and buildings and things that we use in our daily lives. You can read the route map and the bill and respond to that consultation. The more that we feed and everyone feeds into those types of activities, the better understanding policymakers have of what is driving everyone. Excellent. So we do have a couple more questions, so I'll move on to that. Bear with me. So the next question is actually for Peter, is from Kit. One of the things that you said in your presentation was around beautiful, healthy homes should not just be for a selected few. Kit asked, what do you mean by healthy homes?
Yep, good question. It's to me, anything that is made of natural, breathable materials is healthy. It's all about, it's not just about being zero carbon. It's about creating homes that people feel good in, that are warm, and also the breathability is something that is almost inherent with natural materials. So rather than wrapping ourselves in essentially what could be classified as plastic bags, a lot of modern buildings are built with polythene airtightness layers and expanded foam insulation, which is bad in terms of carbon, but also in terms of the environment that we're creating, where we need electric, mechanical fans to give ourselves fresh air and that kind of thing. You know, using natural breathable materials is like having a Gore-Tex jacket on compared to a cagoule. You're not going to sit in there sweating if the fabric of the building can adapt to the various environments.
And just adding on that as well, I think the kind of platforms like First Planet, international recognized standards like Declare, they also have a lot of ways to compare different products, because just because it's natural doesn't mean there's other things in there. When we look at keepable insulation, you've got moth retardants and fire retardants that are part of that mix. So just because you look at a natural material doesn't mean that it's not got other things in there. And I suppose it's understanding all the materials out there and understanding what's in them, what's not obvious, and seeing that as part of that building solution. But yeah, how we regulate moisture, humidity within a building is one of those key ones for mites, for asthma, for other things that can make it a more pleasant, enjoyable space for inhabitants.
If I could just chip in as well. I think if we broaden the definition of healthy out to sort of the total impact on the quality of life of the occupants, I think it's important to recognise that it needs to be an affordable home to live in as well. And given the energy cost crisis that we're facing at the minute, I think energy efficient homes has to be part of that conversation. So we're really advocating for a national retrofit programme to see all of Scotland's homes retrofitted to be warm and affordable for everyone to heat, because I don't think a home that forces its occupants into fuel poverty can ever be considered healthy.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the direction that we're heading in reducing carbon, we are also making homes affordable to run and making them healthy and nicer places to live in, you know. So it's everyone's a winner if we go down that route.
Yeah, and I think there has been quite a bit of research done as well, expanding out from not just healthy homes, but healthy buildings in general. The Gen Zero project, which is a project that Best had supported around, using timber and using wood as a material for creating new secondary schools. Research has been done around, improved, attention, improved attainment, just a better learning environment when students are surrounded by natural materials, natural light, and all of those other kind of benefits that can be achieved from, being closer to nature, like you say, not in that kind of plastic environment. So yeah, lots of work being done there, and you can find out more about the Gen Zero project through Best's website as well. We do have another question, another one for you, Peter, from Neil, is asking what heating are you installing in the houses in Bowton Garten?
Yeah, another interesting question because of what we ended up doing with the COP house. As standard, we had specified using air source heat pumps with underfloor heating. But for the COP house, because it was only going to be there for a couple of weeks, we decided not to install the underfloor heating with the concrete screed, which would all have to be ripped out after a couple of weeks. So instead, we put in extra insulation in the floor and then used these infrared heating panels from a company called Herschel. They were one of the contributors to the house, and you can see them in some of the photographs. Just these white panels up on the ceiling or on the walls, and they work in the same way as sunlight. So they don't heat up the air around the panel itself. They heat up the objects that they are shining on. So the kind of warmth that you get from them is like sunlight on the back of your neck when you're sitting on a cold winter's day. The air around you isn't warm, but you feel warm because of the sun shining on you, and it's that kind of heat that they generate. They can be very easily controlled and low running costs. There's no moving parts, so it worked out as a very good solution for that house, and something that we're looking at more and more with our new houses now. So there's a few different options out there, but the standard we've been using up till now is air source heat pumps, because they're quite efficient. But I think the market is adapting very, very rapidly. Every time you check nowadays, there seems to be new things on the market. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously those types of technologies, because they run off of electricity, they could be combined with kind of on-site generation as well, you know, solar panels and battery storage, for example. Again, you know, looking at that kind of overall, you know, operational cost as well, side of things. So yeah, absolutely great technologies. Next question is from Debbie, who says, apart from policy and regulation, what barriers need to be overcome for the widespread use of low carbon materials?
That definitely feels like it fits in my wheelhouse.
That's Sam.
It really does come down to supply. When we look at the quantities and volumes that are used within the UK, historically we've been buying from manufacturers who've been making maybe petrochemical based or other fuel sources, which comes in a relatively constant abundance. But when we look towards more crop production through hemp or through the availability of timber without excessive deforestation, or when we look to the supply of circular soils, waste aggregates for the use in the Kenotech brick, these are all things that start to ebb and flow, probably a lot more than being able to be reliant on fossil fuel derived products. So understanding that there is challenges there, and also these new companies, these relatively new products, do need to be scaled up in terms of their production capacity, not just the ability to produce them, but also get them out there in the market. A lot of the materials that we've been using in the factory here, probably through that Peter's been using as well, are coming from not from trade counters, not from your big names on the high street. They're coming from specialist online retailers, from agents for specific companies. So it's not like anybody can go along and just, ooh, look at that part of the shelf, I'll take that one today. We need to get to the point where some of these materials are on the shelves of the trade counters and big box stores in the UK, so that they are a material choice that everybody becomes more familiar with.
Yeah,
absolutely. Fantastic. We really only just got a couple of minutes left, so I think I'll leave it there and just move on to thanking the audience for joining us today. We really hope that you learned something and that you enjoyed our Sustainable Materials webinar today as part of the Green Homes Festival. Again, thank you so much to the panel for your thoughts and sharing your expertise and an insightful discussion at the end there. We have got plenty of links in the chat box for you to engage with the circular economy bill that was mentioned, and some of the other roadmaps and points of information. So if you haven't already, maybe click on a few of those links so that you can catch up at a later date. Again, at the end of the webinar, you will see a pop-up for feedback. If you could just take a minute to fill that out, that would be really, really appreciated. And yeah, absolutely, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the Green Homes Festival. You'll be able to pop on and see what the rest of the week's, fortnight's schedule looks like, and sign up for any more of our events. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.